Hi everyone! In this video I want to go over some tips for piping smooth lines while I'm doing this embroidery inspired cake. So this design is actually inspired by an old tablecloth that my grandma hand embroidered. It was a Christmas gift that she made for my mom a really long time ago, and it's really actually a special treasure now that we have to remember her by. So let's get started here. So I just want to show you the colors that I used. I'll list them in the description below, but I wanted to show you that I didn't actually mix anything. I just used one dye for each shade. And then a little tip for you is that a tiny speck of purple is going to help if you're trying to get white frosting, because it kind of offsets the yellow that you get from the butter. So now I'm going to fill my piping bags. I'll show you the piping tip in a minute. You will find it's a lot easier to fill your piping bags if you prop them up in a glass like this. That way you'll have both of your hands when you go to scoop the frosting out, and you won't have to be holding on to the bag. The tip I'm using is a small round tip. It's a number 2. You could pipe these lines without a piping tip. You could just cut the tip off of the bag, but using the piping tip helps you make a smoother, more consistent line. So I would definitely go for the piping tip if you can get one. So I'm starting off with this cake that I've already frosted, and I let it chill in the fridge until the buttercream is completely firm. That way while I'm piping, if I bump into it, I won't mess anything up. It's cold enough that it can't be really damaged. So my first tip for you is that when you're piping something like this, you want to find a really comfortable position. I actually like to sit at a table if I can. That way I can rest my elbows on the table, and that provides a lot of stability when you're piping, because what you really want is to have the most steady hand possible. And if you're holding your arms up while you're trying to pipe, it's going to make things a lot more shaky. Another tip for piping smooth lines is to use your fingers to help steady the piping bag. So I'm right-handed, so I'm holding the bag in my right hand, and then I'm using the fingers on my left hand to steady the tip of the bag. I'd also recommend that you try to hold the bag perpendicular to the side of your cake. If you're holding the bag at an angle, it kind of makes it harder for everything to pipe out straight. It's not as predictable the way the frosting is going to come out, so definitely try to hold it as nice and even and perpendicular as you can to your surface. And then when you're piping lines like this, where you want the line to be nice and straight, you're actually going to want to lift the frosting away from the cake as you pipe. If you hold the tip right against the cake, it'll show every little wiggle and shake from your hand. What you want to do instead is to touch to the cake where you want the line to start, and then pull away as you squeeze. Stop squeezing just before you want the line to end, and bring the tip back towards the cake to attach the other end. So gravity is your friend here. Try to pipe from the top to the bottom if you can. If you happen to mess up any of your piping, you can pretty easily scrape it off with a small offset spatula or a butter knife. Just be sure your cake is well chilled before you start piping, that way you don't mess up the frosting underneath. And also I just wanted to mention that most of the piping in this video is very sped up, so don't worry if it looks like I'm going really fast. I promise you I'm taking my time. It actually took me, I think, about an hour to pipe everything on this cake, and I'm condensing it down into a much shorter video so that you can get just the good parts. Don't get freaked out about all the little details. If you look at any one of these flowers up close, none of them are perfect, but when you see the whole thing together, it looks a lot better. So try to look at the big picture and not every tiny little line. And don't forget, with this kind of thing, practice definitely makes perfect. The more you pipe, the more confident you're going to be. I know you've heard that a million times before, but it's really true with piping. It takes lots of practice to feel comfortable and confident when you're doing these designs, especially when you're doing them right onto the cake. And even within this just one cake, the first flowers that I piped were a little bit wonky, but by the time I got rolling and got to the end, I was feeling a lot more warmed up and flowers were coming out a lot more nicely. So be patient with yourself, and remember, it's actually all about eating the cake in the end. So don't worry if there's some tiny little mistakes. If you like these piping tips and found them useful, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel and like this video. I'll be posting new cake decorating tutorials and tips every week. And you can also find me on Instagram at BakingButterlyLove. I'll link that below as well. Don't forget to tag me if you use any of these tips. I love to see what you're making. See you next week.